Hi everyone, welcome to our 63rd video session here at Impaction. We have now rebranded to Impactionable, so thank you to everyone that's watching and for following us on our journey. We're really excited to speak today to the co-founders of Perennial Culture. But before we get started, I would just love to share a little bit about what we do at Impactionable and a little bit about our video sessions as well. So to start off, Impactionable, we help people find jobs, networking opportunities, and funding in the social impact space. And we partner with meaningful partners who are also have social impact at the center of their mission and help them with their talent initiatives and marketing initiatives around the world. Video sessions is a part of the marketing initiative where we host hackathons and webinars such as the one that we have here today with amazing social impact leaders, so we can not only learn as a community but we can grow. So that's a little bit about us, and now I'm going to go ahead and ask everyone to introduce themselves in 2 sentences or less, and I will start with myself. So I'm Shivani. I'm the CEO of Impactionable. I also work as a budget and grants analyst at Chicago Public Schools, and yes, I am therefore located in Chicago. Lily, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, sure. My name's Lily Mittenthal. I'm the co-founder and CPO of a company called Morrow. I also work at GE Transportation full-time. So I was originally from Chicago, but I'm here in Chattanooga, Tennessee now.
Nice. Well, good to
Yeah.
see you. Jennifer, you want to go next? And thanks for turning on your camera.
Sure. My name's Jen Ferrer. I live in Chicago. I'm actually about to start a new job tomorrow as the Senior Manager of Life Science Alliances at Tempest Labs, also in Chicago. And so really excited about this webinar and what I can bring into my new position.
Nice. Thank you so much. And Aneysha and Zach, I'm going to, introduce both of you. So thank you so much for being here today. Today we're going to be hosting the co-founders of Perennial Culture. They're speaking about creating thriving cultures within your organization through the culture system design framework. Zach Dahms and Aneysha Bhat are co-founders of Perennial Culture. They have the passion for culture and its use as a powerful tool to drive greater collective social impact through empathy, empowerment, and energizing dialogues. Their mission is to empower organizations and communities with the tools to create sustainable and thriving cultures. In this session, they'll touch on what it means to be a culture strategist and how leaders can systemically design thriving and sustainable cultures within social systems. Today, it's not enough to create change at the level of symptoms and structures. We need to work even deeper to change the underlying paradigms of thought and to connect with our deeper sources of creativity and self. Their culture system design is a framework and method for how to do that. Wow, what a value-based sort of framework, and I'm really excited to learn more about it today. So thank you both for being here today, and if you want to add anything to your introduction, please do so. And you can start sharing your screen and walk through the presentation afterwards. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's a tough introduction to follow up with. Thank you for setting the stage so well. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Awesome. Yeah, and just to echo what Zach said, thank you so much, Shivani. Thanks for providing this platform to share the message about social impact. And Lily and Jen, it's so nice to meet you virtually. And yeah, we're excited to be here and sharing our mission, our drive to impact sustainability and culture, and yeah, have an engaging and exciting discussion for you today. So I'm Aneysha. Just a little bit about me. I'm a co-founder and culture strategist with Perennial Culture. My background is in biomedical engineering, and I currently work at GE Healthcare and AI. I am also a public policy and administration graduate student at Northwestern University. I'm from Chicago, and I currently live in Milwaukee. And with me is Zach. So Zach, do you want to briefly introduce yourself too?
Yeah, thank you. So I am also in Milwaukee. My background is definitely more in the corporate space and have an MBA in organizational design. I've worked heavily in the design thinking and social impact space for a number of years now, and have worked internally for a software company for the last 5, doing a number of cultural initiatives within the organization at a team level, but then also at the organizational level. So Aneysha and I really pair up our design thinking and system thinking approach to culture, and which we're excited to kind of share a little bit about what that is and how you can be empowered to do that as well.
Awesome. So that's, I feel like, the perfect segue into really why we're here and what we do. So Perennial Culture's mission is to really empower organizations and communities with tools to create sustainable and thriving cultures. And so sustainability is truly a key aspect, a central aspect of what we do. In looking at how culture is tackled generally, you see that there's this process called culture transformation, and essentially taking A and turning it into B. And in some of our cultural work, Zach and I discovered that in that transformative process, there's a lack of continuation, a lack of an evolution, and that continuation of growth. And so sustainability, we discovered, is really key in terms of energizing, sustaining, and empowering cultural growth over time, so that any kind of progressive practice, any kind of progress that you make is continued as an organization or as a community grows. And so our strategies ensure that culture is developed collaboratively. So we believe in co-creating culture, having long-term goals in mind, creating a well-established objectives, strategic objectives, and really having that people-centric design thinking, process-oriented thinking in mind when creating a sustainable culture that is created today for the future. And so going off of that, our vision is really a world of thriving, sustainable, self-organized cultures. And what I mean by that is we believe in creating a culture where people, communities, organizations, and really our world collectively grows in harmony over time, enhancing that sustainability, embracing and empowering that sustainability through continuous growth. So today we're here to really provide a sneak peek in terms of what is culture, what is cultural system design, and really how you can empower yourself, your team, your organization, your company to become a culture change maker, a cultural champion in the place where you are, where you work, where you contribute to social impact.
Yeah. So before we kind of jump into all of the goods of today's discussion, we often like to discuss this question right here and really set the stage a little bit here. And I won't make everyone unmute and kind of talk about this out loud, and maybe we can add to this at the end, but let's do a little chat waterfall action. We do really enjoy these smaller activities, but how would you define culture? And I want everyone in 3 to 5 words to start typing in their own perspective. What is culture? Please hold off from pressing enter right away. We'll give a few seconds for everyone to get it, and then we'll kind of submit our answers at the same time. Awesome. Expectations, ethics, behaviors, social and professional. All right, actions, interactions, and behaviors. This is great.
Understanding of others, empathy. I love that.
Beliefs and values held by the organization. Understanding of others. I love it. The thing about this question is there's really no wrong answer, right? Culture is kind of our own perspective at the end of the day, and we'll dive into that a little bit here in a second. But our kind of definition of what culture is and how we view it as system design strategists or culture system design strategists is culture is this systemic energy, and really it flows all around us at all times. It's self-evolving, and it's shaped by the actions and interactions and lack of interactions, behaviors, and the environment around us. So really, whenever you have a group of people in a team, organization, or community, or whatever kind of the context is, you're going to have a culture that forms automatically, whether you're intentional about it or not. It will happen regardless if really you want it to or not, right? We always have a culture. And we really want to understand what culture is so we can start to harness it and design it and be more intentional around it. Now, we were also very intentional about our name as a brand and what Perennial is. So what is a perennial culture, Aneysha?
Great question. So as Zach said, we like to be intentional when it comes to being strategic and strategically developing, enhancing, and empowering culture. And so when we talk about perennial culture, a perennial culture is something that lasts or exists over a long or infinite period of time. It's enduring, it's continually recurring, and it's really sustainable, right? When you think about a perennial plant continues to grow. It continues to grow stronger over time. It continues to come back more empowered. And it has that element of evolutionary resilience. You know, it's able to beat out the snow and come back green and beautiful as ever every single spring. It's able to thrive regardless of the conditions that it's in. And so a perennial culture is really embracing that power, that resilience, that continuous growth, and creating strong roots of a foundation, creating a strong foundation so that that foundation embraces the qualities of a perennial and creates growth based on that strong foundation. So creating evolutionary growth, which is nurtured with empathy, it's empowered to grow in a sustainable way, and it's continuously progressing, it's continuously growing as time goes on.
Yeah. So we'll do one more chat waterfall here, and then we can start to jump into what is culture system design and what is that process. So another group question is, okay, now that we kind of have a shared understanding of what culture is, what do you think some of the foundational sources are of a culture? And what are some of those elements that are really driving what the culture is within its environment, whether that's your team, organization, or community? And maybe a few words in the chat. Let's go ahead and type in your mind, what are some of those key elements or sources to a culture? And then we'll kind of see what everyone's answers is again. People bond. Shivani, this is great. Leadership. Standards set.
Shivani, I love that you mentioned the inter and intra-team interactions. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
The inter and intra-team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, within the team, there ultimately has to be some sort of human-centered sort of standards set. So we can put, you know, the people first and values first, rather than with essentially, actually I think intra is more within and then inter is between, right? So it's actually flipped. So yeah, inter is, you know, between not only the leaders, but between the entire organization. And then intra means like the shared values that all of you ultimately would be able to, like the common values that you would be able to move forward with as a team. I don't know if I did the right job.
That's great.
Perfect.
Thank you. Love these answers. So I'll share a quick graph or visual here that I think probably a lot of us are very familiar with, especially in the social impact space. The iceberg is often referred to when driving social change. And we like to reference this as well around the sources of culture. And it's really essential that we use this as a tool to look at some of the less obvious aspects that reinforce our culture, right? As we kind of noted before, there are obvious and unconscious ways as well that really reinforce what is our realities and our perceptions and the culture that grows. Above the waterline, we see things like events, processes, systems. A lot of times this is where leaders spend their most time. This is where they really look at, something happens and they reactively respond to that event in that moment. And then they kind of move on to their normal ways of acting. These are really easy to monitor, and they're great to start to understand maybe some patterns. But really what we want to do is start looking below the waterline, where some of those root causes and more complex issues are found, or elements of our culture that really reinforce our reality. So being able to move to this level, you're going to find even deeper patterns from those events that you see from the surface level. And really what you're going to be able to do is start making connections between the different levels. So it's a useful way to really understand the complexity of culture and place your attention at the different levels of it. As system thinking practices and system designers that Aneysha and I are, we'll often add arrows and connections between the different levels as well. So we can really start to find the causal relationships between them and really start to find out, like, okay, here's what we're seeing at the surface level through the system design process that we'll jump into here in a second. We'll be able to kind of connect them to the deeper elements of the iceberg that really stimulate our understanding of where our culture is driven from. So that's where culture system design really comes into play when we're looking to understand what is our culture, where is it growing from, and how can we be more empowered to reinforce a thriving and sustainable culture and drive more culture champions throughout all levels of the organization. We truly believe there is a systemic approach to designing everything, and that includes culture itself. And it also allows us to be more holistic in our perspective of how do we create culture in a sustainable way. So at the end of the day, this process allows really the system it see itself, including the people who are part of the system, and it allows the community and network to be much more innovative with the solutions and breakthroughs that we create. So we're going to kind of walk through this process step by step, and then we can kind of open it up at the end for further discussion. And really the first stage here is to engage, right? Yeah, go ahead, Aneysha.
Yeah, so as Zach mentioned, right, the whole culture system design process is really people-centric, human-centric, and embraces the fact that people make up the culture. An environment can contain the culture, can shape the culture, but at the end of the day, it's the people, their interactions, their beliefs, their behaviors, all of the things that you guys mentioned in the chat that really create the foundation of the culture and dictate where it goes from here. Right. And so the first step in the culture system design process is engaging. So the engage phase really has to do with building a capacity to collaborate, building a foundation to understand, how do we create change from here? How do we create a contribution so that everybody feels that they're able to contribute to the culture? Everybody is empowered to become a culture change maker. But before we talk about empowerment and energizing culture, we have to talk about where to start, right? And that's really the engage phase. Who are the people involved? What are the organizations? What are the current state of the art practices that influence culture at the time, right? And so understanding all of these different aspects and elements, the foundation and where things currently are, helps us understand, clarify, and really develop a strategy moving forward, right? The overall goal and objective of this engage phase, is to really establish that common ground, really establish where are things at today and where do we need to go. Understanding the gap between where things are today and what we want or where we want to go helps us establish a strategy moving forward to continue following that culture system design process. So the people involved could be key stakeholders, they could be organizations that affect the culture, they could be leaders, employees, individuals in the community, whatever it is, right? And in the nonprofit space, in the social impact space, when it comes to the public, it could be individuals in the public, civilians, citizens, specific populations, right? Government agencies, law enforcement, whatever it is. And so really all of these key stakeholders engage with each other in some way, shape, or form. And so really in this phase, we dedicate time to understanding who are these stakeholders, what are their relationships, and how can we better understand how things need to progress from here, or what can be improved, or what the current challenges are. So really what we call this is cultural ecosystem mapping. So what we want to do is, as I mentioned, taking all of these different elements, we want to be able to understand what the relationships are between all of these different key stakeholders. And that really leads us into our second phase, which is the empathize phase. As I mentioned, we do this ecosystem mapping process. And what this really allows us to do is understand these relationships between all of these different elements that may be different, maybe practicing in different ways, practicing in different environments. They may interact, they may not interact. And so really the purpose of the empathize phase is to effectively hold space, meaning effectively develop an environment where relationships or interactions can occur, see through the eyes of another, understand and empathize from a different perspective how challenges may be seen in a different way or how interactions may play out differently, and understanding how we can break down egos and build an ecosystem together. So here it says, go from ecosystem to ecosystem, go from thinking as an individual to thinking as a collective or a collaborative group. And really, this is where we start to see the human-centric design, right? Empathizing is all about understanding and connecting with the soul of another person, the mission, the vision, the values of another individual. And when we start to empathize, we start to understand challenges from different perspectives. We start to network and really take that humanity into account when building a culture, because culture is human-centric at the end of the day, right? So we use a lot of different technologies and methods to really empathize with one another. And one of the methods that we use is something we call an empathy walk, right? This could be done virtually. This is something that you could even do in person, right, with another individual. But this is a practice where we really try to exercise that empathy muscle, right? We want to build that empathetic connection with another person and really understand life through their shoes, challenges from another person's perspective. And this is really a practice that you can do anywhere in your life, in your organization, in your company, in your life, in your family, to better understand how to relate to another person, to see life through their eyes, to understand challenges. We use this same empathy walk strategy with organizations. How to understand challenges from a different perspective, how to take all of these different key stakeholders that may exist and interact in a community, bring them together and understand challenges from different perspectives to really empathize, engage, and from there move into the next stage and create solutions, start to create solutions. And so that next stage is the energize stage.
Yeah, so at this point, we really understand kind of where we're all coming from, and we've established some common ground around where we are today. So now it's time to kind of energize this social ecosystem, the social system, into a state where it's ready to evolve and move into a future state or something much more thriving and much more sustainable. And really this starts with developing a shared sense of where we're going and sharing a sense of that direction, right? And that includes things as simple as clearly articulating the mission and vision and values of the group or the organization, and really what are we trying to accomplish and what is that purpose, and clarifying that future that we want to create together. And there's a ton of different factors that will kind of influence this kind of visioning exercise. But once you start to kind of energize your culture with a future state, it creates a instant progressive tension for change, right? It's creating a gap between where you are today and where you want to go. And it's going to motivate and influence the structure itself to start evolving and changing into that future state. So we're going to kind of use that iceberg again here in a couple different ways. We'll often start to map out through the engage and empathy stage of where we are today on that iceberg. And then through the future state design, we'll kind of fill that iceberg in different ways of what do we want our culture to look like. And you'll start to see the differences between levels. You'll start to see the different systems, the processes that need to evolve and change. Or at a deeper level, what are some of the mindsets and perceptions and values of our leaders and our people that we need to start working on changing as well? Because those are really the underlying roots that reinforce our reality. One of the ways we do this is an effective tool called the cultural compass. It involves a number of different frameworks and methods that really guide you towards your future state and what direction you're going to be heading in. So once you start to create kind of that gap between your current reality and where you want to go, it's all about empowering yourself, empowering the team, and empowering the culture as a whole in the system to be able to make that leap forward. So you have a clear idea of where you're going. You have a clear idea of where you are. Now it's time to kind of explore the future by creating it through a number of different types of experiments, pilot programs, actions, and behaviors. What's really important is as you move forward, a lot of times there are time delays to the success that you're going to see. You need to maintain that connection to your cultural compass. That's going to keep your system grounded. When everything's changing, you need some unchangeables, right? And that's going to be kind of your core at the center that keeps your system and your team and your social kind of structure together moving in the right direction. And again, we're not asking organizations to make giant leaps and bounds here. A lot of times it's taking small steps that push your structure forward. Here we're going to develop playbooks. We're going to look at the different contexts that reinforce our culture, such as the systems, the spaces, the social relationships, and us as individuals. And we're going to make sure that we have the tools and the investments and the capabilities to make that leap forward as well. So what type of training do we need? What type of investments and resources do we need to put in place to empower our people to make this leap forward? What's really typical is organizations will often skip to this stage without going through the earlier stages. They'll start just making changes without taking time to understand and empathize with what is really reinforcing our culture today. And that often leads to short-lived solutions with little return in the long run, right? So things often happen and then a little time goes by and they snap back into their old way of being. So it's really important that we do not skip ahead to the empower stage and we make sure to go through the system design process. So we're creating effective solutions and strategies. And then we can dive into really the key powers for change and the different contexts of the behavior. But what's really important at this point as well, change is uncomfortable. There's a lot of uncertainties and fears that come up and insecurities. It's important that we be comfortable with letting go of the old and what we know and allow everyone individually and collectively to make that leap across into the future state that we all designed together in the energize phase. At that point, now we're ready to evolve.
Exactly. And so just to summarize here, based on what Zach was saying, right? First, we went through an engagement. Then we empathized. We understood what the status quo is today. How do we relate to each other on a more human-centric level? How do we take that energy and really energize our mission, our vision, our core values forward? And then from there, how do we execute this playbook, right? How do we take all of this positive energy that we've capitalized on so far? How do we turn that into action? So now if you look at these 4 phases on their own, you oftentimes hear about culture transformation, right? Something that I alluded to in the beginning of this presentation. These 4 stages alone exist as an episode of transformation, right? Something that you follow this process and then you think, so what, right? Where do I go from here? I know I need to take action, but how do I do that? I take action once and then I'm good. Is that really how culture works? Am I good then? And the answer is no, right? These 4 stages alone really capture that episodic transformation that organizations really use today. And the problem with that approach is that lack of sustainability. And so that really dives into our 5th phase, which is evolution. And so cultural evolution really has to do with the sustainability of cultural practice taken forward, right? How do you embrace all of this positive energy that you've created, all of this action that you've planned for? How do you take that forward, right? How do you create social impact using all of this information, using all of this knowledge that you've gained and you've produced, this action plan that you have? How do you continue to make that action and take action so that you can continue to make progress in the future for your organization, for your community, for whatever purpose you're pursuing cultural change making and cultural evolution? So this is where it really comes down to sustainability. And so it's interesting because we constantly live in this ebb and flow of culture, right? Cultural energy is always around us. It ebbs and flows. And really what it comes down to is empowering that cultural energy to continue on a path of growth, to continue that culture in the direction that you want it to go in. And that's when it comes down to, and it comes back to becoming a perennial, right? How do you create energy so that it's continuously evolving, it's sustainable, it's continuously growing, and you can continue to invest in it so that it continues to move in that direction where you want it to go, right? Zach alluded to training programs and transformational programs. How do you continue to invest in those type of opportunities so that people can continue to grow? How do you continue to invest in social programs that continue to make impact for people, future generations after that, right? So that it's not just a program for today, it's a program for the future. So the evolutionary phase really has to do with the future sustainable practice of culture and that growth of culture in the direction where you want it to go. And so moving forward, living with this paradigm of cultural evolution and cultural sustainability, this is really how you are put on a path towards creating a sustainable culture that is really rooted in engagement and empathy. It's nurtured with that energy, and it's empowered for sustainable continuous growth in the long term. And so now Zach is going to talk about how we take some of this energy in our day-to-day basis as cultural practice.
Exactly. So this framework is really meant for any social context. This can include team cultures, organizations as a whole, or even larger social systems within our own community, which is really a focal point for Aneysha and I's work. We work in really all 3 of those sectors. Specifically growing cultures, you think about those startups that are kind of leaving from that early stage development. It's just the founding team, and now they need to grow as an organization. They need to bring in new roles, new responsibilities. They're actually growing a culture for the first time. So how can we be intentional with it on the front end so they're not having to intervene it down the road, which is often the most common case, unfortunately. The second sector there is established organizations. So a lot of times organizations need to roll out new strategic directions. There's leadership changes, market demands, M&A activity. Really, there's so many things year over year that changes in the environment that require culture evolution. So we often work with top leaders as well as training and developing programs to empower employees to be those culture advocates and champions at all levels of an organization. And then larger social systems and communities as well. So we have a firm commitment and tie to the Sustainable Development Goals established by the United Nations. We also have a deep passion for the social impact space as a whole. And we utilize this framework to work in those different social systems and different stakeholders throughout the community. For example, one thing that we can talk about then here as well if we have time, but we're leading a diverse amount of stakeholders to grow the clean energy sector in the state of Wisconsin right now. We are also launching a program here in the next 2 weeks that is geared around empowering individuals with the methods and tools that are used throughout the culture system design process. So you can take these and apply them to your own social system. So there's still time to sign up with that. More than happy to talk more about that program. But at the end of the day, we're all part of these social systems. We all can be empowered to make a difference and an impact in them. It's all about just understanding where you are within this social system and how we can use culture system design to start reinforcing something much more sustainable for the greater good. So I'll stop sharing my screen there, but thank you so much. We can open it up here as well. And Shivani, I can pass it over to you. But thank you for listening, and I really enjoyed talking culture.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zech and Aneysha. This was a great session. I actually just want to open it up to the community. You know, does anyone have any thoughts or questions that they want to ask our co-founders? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I will start it off, actually. I know that you talked about the various applications that, you know, this framework can have depending on, you know, the different institutions that you end up working with. I know that especially in the social impact space, there's a difference between for-profit and nonprofit companies. And especially with these corporations that are working more towards the corporate social responsibility models that we're seeing as well. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, the various applications and maybe the, you know, how to customize this framework towards those sorts of institutions as well?
Yeah, so I think the question was at the end of the day, like, how do we take maybe some of those for-profit institutions and transition them into something bigger than the profits of the organization?
Yeah, like the triple bottom line, using this cultural sort of human-centered narrative.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the things that we often get questions on leaders is how do we develop a evolutionary purpose to our organization versus the typical standard mission statement, right? And having that kind of established purpose statement beyond driving wealth for the shareholders of the organization helps start to develop that triple bottom line, right? And part of that also includes empathizing and engaging with your people to understand what is the impact that we want to make within our community or within the world. Because you want to be able to tie the individual purpose with the organizational purpose and align those in a way that drive greater collective impacts within the community. So it is a balancing act between the hidden agendas and other agendas as well, right? And why stakeholders are coming into the system, and then develop that underlying connection to something greater beyond the historic for-profit reason of existence that a company has. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to chime in here real quick, I think Zach said it perfectly, right? When it comes down to it and some of these organizational challenges that we've seen in a lot of different for-profit or nonprofit organizations, regardless of the type of organization, sometimes the challenges seem to be the same, right? And sometimes some of those challenges do come down to orienting the organization or the team around why are we here, right? What is, you know, profit society aside, why are we here? Why do we exist today? Regardless of the product, regardless of the service, we have a mission, right? And so if our practices and our leadership and our teams aren't aligned with that mission or aren't aligned with the values that the company or the organization represents, then there can certainly be a disconnect, regardless of the sector that it's in, right? We see this in government entities as well. We see this in public agencies, just like we see it in corporations. And so I think what it really comes down to, just like Zach said, is energizing that mission and really understanding the purpose of the social impact or the social responsibility in terms of corporations that the organization is here to create, right? Re-energizing, what is that mission? What are the values that we want to represent? What is the vision that we're taking forward? And from't how can we all align to do things in a better way, in a more sustainable way?
How do you see, you know, especially because we're seeing more of these MNCs going into the social impact sort of corporate social responsibility models, right? So how do you see this sort of trend? I think, we can say that millennials and Gen Zs are increasingly asking their corporate leadership to think about social missions now. Especially with last year, with everything that happened with George Floyd, climate change is being more and more pressing now. So we see, especially people in these two sorts of generations, really pushing upper leadership to, like you said, not only care a little bit about the profit, but the triple bottom line. So I guess my question is, what do you see changing, especially in the cultural framework over the next 10, 20 years? And, how do you think that would evolve with your work?
So I think one thing that's definitely changing is the mindset shift, right? From a mindset of this is how it should be to we know this is how it should be. Now let's do something about it, right? So I think the delta there is really action, right? I think previously there's been this, and it goes back to that transformational mindset that I was talking about earlier. This idea that, okay, well, if we do a training program, I think we'll be set on the right course. It's a little more than that, right? It's applying the training program or applying knowledge or learnings to create things or sustain things in a more sustainable way, a better way, right? Ensure that practices are changed so that future generations benefit from any kind of progress that's made. And so I think that in the next 10, 20 years, Gen Zs and millennials are really going to be those action-oriented individuals, those change makers that are taking the values and the need for action and actually turning it into action, right? We see that through policy. We see that through community action as well, right? Community organizations are now starting to develop better ways to take action during COVID times, right? Virtually. We're seeing that this progress and any kind of curveball that society or the world throws at us, we're finding ways, especially the younger generations are finding ways to get around those and innovate, right? Innovate to take action and continue to develop solutions despite the hurdles that we may have to cross. And that action-oriented mindset is really the key in order to continue sustainable progress. And how it relates to our work is that evolutionary mindset as well, right? It comes back to, okay, we know we have to take action. We know that we can be empowered as a generation or as a future generation, but how do we take action to continue that empowerment forward, right? So I think what it really comes down to is harvesting that positive energy, that empowerment, and taking action to empower others. One person taking action can inspire somebody else to take action too. And so when it comes to culture, it's developing that cultural sustainability, that culture of empower somebody else to take action so that they can also empower somebody else. And that chain continues forward. Having that sustainability mindset and that action-oriented mindset is really going to be key.
Yeah, and one thing that we always talk about is kind of the economics of culture and really what is the environment demanding from organizations, and our organization supplying those demands from the environment. And right now, the environment's demanding a more conscious effort towards D&I activities, towards more wellness initiatives, and things along that nature. And I think purpose is a next demand that is really going to come into play, where Aneysha and I have a lot of leaders coming to us and saying like, okay, we started investing in D&I and we're starting to notice there's so much deeper in our culture that's toxic and wrong that we need to intervene. And a lot of it stems from what we're kind of driving towards is taking purpose into something that's like an evolutionary purpose that's going to evolve with those demands from the environment. What is the world calling for? And is our organization going to be of service of that demand? So those evolutionary cultural demands and supplies are going to change, I think, ongoing forever.
I have a question. So oftentimes I feel like culture kind of gets set at the top of an organization and like it sort of trickles down. But like say you're a part of an organization where that is the case, and you know, like I feel like the people that generally have much more of a pulse on what the culture is and the ways in which it's working and isn't working are, especially in hierarchical organizations, like people more at the bottom, which make up the bulk of the organization. And so how, if you are sort of like lower in the hierarchy, do you bring it to the attention of like upper level management or the people that are really setting the tone for the company? How do you like get buy-in from them, I guess?
Yeah, that's an enormous challenge. It's probably the biggest challenge to any culture change initiative. If leadership is not aware or recognize the toxic behaviors, will culture change actually ever happen? And unfortunately, it does have to have leadership involved, and it is driven from the top. And part of our strategies is to encourage culture change from the top down, bottom up, inside out, right? So we can really ensure a full out culture evolution. But how do you effectively engage leaders when that's not the buy-in, right? So there are a few kind of core strategies, and a lot of it is been some more of the grassroots efforts of gaining enough people that are contributing to the communication upstream, and you're not going at it alone. You know, I've done that at a few organizations, especially my own in the software space, where, you know, we start to gather almost like our internal ERG and put together a business case to our values that we're seeing and start to drive executive buy-in. So one of the things that we always encourage anyone at the lower level is develop your team of culture advocates. This is not a thing you have to go in alone. And if you're feeling it, there's a high percentage chance that others are feeling it as well. So just initiating that conversation, maybe getting some mid-level managers or leaders involved, and eventually trying to get some type of executive sponsor or someone at the top is C-suite level to kind of also champion that with you and start making that change. So it does take time though to develop some of those grassroots kind of teams, but that's a really effective way to kind of start gaining some momentum in them.
Yeah, and just to chime in, Jen, I'm so glad that you asked that question, because culture is definitely designed from the top down, like it's a product, right? It's an idea that comes from the top down, and it's packaged in a certain way and sometimes given to employees like, here you go, this is our culture. But it shouldn't be designed that way. And the fact that it's designed that way speaks to what kind of organizational culture exists in that specific company, organization, community, whatever it is. We like to say that culture is almost like it should be designed like a slice of a cake, right? Like when you take a cake, you take a slice of it, you see all the different layers of that cake. You see the top, you see the middle, you see the bottom, right? And the culture system design process takes every level of that cake into account. Because when you take a slice of that cake, all of the different slices create what the cake is about, right? It's a snapshot of what that entire cake is about. And you need every single layer into account and really understand what that entire body is about. And so really, like what Zach said, everybody needs to be involved in that process. And one way to certainly do that is through, the formation of an ERG, an employee resource group, talking to some of those individuals in your organization who may be feeling the same way, getting someone who may have some more of that managerial leadership or some more leadership experience on board and forming this type of organization or collective group, right? Meeting with executive leadership, meeting with HR, pulling them into some of these conversations as well. Even asking managers, for example, if you do Gallup surveys or if you do other surveys that evaluate where the culture is today, asking about, hey, we did that survey. Now, what are some of the actions that we're going to take from this, right? Even approaching leadership with those kind of questions. That can be really sparking that interest, showing leadership that your employees are really interested in asking more and learning more, improving, right? Especially if some of those surveys highlight areas of improvement. Having that action plan, and that's where it comes back to action, right? As the employees understanding that multiple people are going through this, having a collective voice behind something and pulling in those managers, pulling in HR could be really strategic in terms of moving change forward. And obviously, right, change takes time, but taking those baby steps, that's what really creates the impact. And that's what will also show leaders that, you know, our employees are engaged, our employees care about our work environment and being here, being a part of this organization. So we should invest in this so that they also feel that the culture is moving in a more progressive direction.
Thank you.
Awesome. I hate to do this, but we do need to wrap up. I want to respect everyone's time. So thank you so much, Zech and Aneysha, for an amazing session. I learned a lot. And I hope others on this call learned a lot as well. Before we wrap up, I just want to share some, opportunities that Zech and Aneysha shared with us. I think they added in the call to check out their Culture Accelerator program. And I'll be sending up a follow-up email with everyone as well. And we'll link that into the email. And I think, I actually do want to ask both of them very briefly in like a sentence or less to share, one last thought that they would like to share with our community, either like a piece of advice or ultimately a call to action, one that I haven't covered as well. If you two want to share anything before we depart, that would be amazing, I think, for people on this call and also our viewers. So anyone can go first.
Okay, thank you. I will share that really anyone can be empowered to be a culture advocate and a culture champion. We all are elements and part of that social system, and it does not need to be waves of change, but essentially let's create ripples of change that turn into waves of change, and really that can get so much more impact for our society beyond doing nothing. So be a culture advocate, I would say.
Love it. And Aneysha?
I would add on to what Zech is saying and add the action aspect of it, right? Mm-hmm. Chances are, if you're feeling a certain way about the environment that you're in or the organizational culture that you're in, someone else may be feeling that way too. And so understanding and empathizing with this kind of environment, with this kind of issue, raising your voice and voicing your opinion about something, and really, like Zech said, taking action to become that cultural change maker and become that beacon of change. I think that's really what it's going to take. And so we all have that capability to take action and make change. It's just a matter of empowering that, embracing that, and connecting with others to continue the chain of empowerment to make that cultural change.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Some announcements from us. We have a new video session coming up in 2 weeks. We also feel free to please check out our website at impactionable.com. We post jobs every single week. We post new events, funding opportunities. So we also have a private Facebook group. So we share, new resources every single day on that. So I'll add that link to the email too. But I really thank everyone for joining here today on this Sunday morning, evening, wherever you are. And thank you so much to our presenters. It was absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited that we were able to share this cultural system design work with you all. And as Shivani mentioned, I've dropped some of our social media information in the chat, as well as our Culture Accelerator program website. So feel free to check it out. If you're interested, or if you know someone who's interested in applying, please reach out. If you have any questions, please submit an application. And we're excited that we're able to share this all with you.
Thanks, guys.